Hey, welcome back to another episode with Ollie and myself. Or if this is your first time tuning in, welcome and good to have you here. We're going to dive into the juicy topic of habit building, habit change, etc. today. And Ollie has a bit of a fun angle to take on this because he has literally had some first-hand experience recently getting into this with learning a language on Duolingo. And there's some really cool psychological kind of habit change behaviors which we can take away from this platform, which has been built very cleverly in order to help people make some changes. And there's some pretty phenomenal statistics on how big Duolingo's grown and how it's helped people change their habits and learning languages, obviously, Ollie. But take me through what's been your big takeaways. I guess, break it down before we get into all the nitty gritty, which is what we do here on these discussions. But what's been your big learnings from getting into Duolingo recently?
Yeah, it's been fun. I think that one of the biggest changes is getting uncomfortable again with something that you feel completely amateur with, right? And I think in the changes we make every single week with clients trying to get back their health back on their side, it's a very close association because it's that idea of being comfortable with being bad at something before you can be good at something, right? And it's starting with about three words that I knew to getting close to be able to string sentences together. I'm still in the early days, has been a nice progression and just, I guess, a really good insight into the psychology of habit change, of learning, of personal, I was going to say personal composure, but probably more personal um, compassion of being able to go through that process of learning something. And, something that all of us can say out loud and not really even register with ourselves is it's always better to do a little bit every day rather than once a week, right? And when you look at languages, think about how most people would approach that or how I intended to approach it, which is, cram in 2 or 3 hours worth of learning on a Saturday, forget it all by next Saturday and have to start again. Versus having that sort of 10-minute chunk every day to just be like, oh, yep, those are the words I learned yesterday, and here's one or two more. And sort of building through that process of stringing it through sentences, with reading, through selecting, through listening, and through being able to speak, right? So there's sort of three main areas of learning a language. So, the breaking this down, if you're not aware of Duolingo, it's a company that's been around for a really, really long time, but it's in a space that's now got over 16 million active users. It's a really big platform. And if you're wanting to learn any language, like I couldn't even think of another one I'd recommend other than Duo. And it's because they've absolutely nailed their psychology to habit change. So, we talked about this morning, Mandy, and hence why we kind of record on this is we can nerd out on the habit change stuff all day because it absolutely applies to our members. There's stuff that we already, reinforce quite strongly, and I'm happy that it's, working very well, and things that we're going to continue to reinforce a bit more moving forward to really help our members succeed in their health efforts. And if you're listening to this, I think you're probably going to pick up some really nice nuggets as well. So, Mandy, I'm going to kind of throw this back on you as well, but from talking through the languages discussion, you've obviously also got, I think, a brother or a relative or something that's going through this as well, learning a language, and it seems to be a space where you end up getting married to someone who's got a different language background, and then you realize, shit, I should probably learn this language at some point, which is very much what happened to me with French, and what happened with your brother with German. So I guess from what we've talked about so far, like the whole behavior change standpoint, like what really stands out to you has been like, yes, I want more people to know about that.
I think what Duolingo does really well is that it's super accessible. It's really easy, right? It's there on your phone. You can click into it. You can just do a minute or a little bit. You don't have to, and it sucks you in. You want to keep doing more and more, and it really gamifies it. And we talk about this a bit, I guess, with our clients too, and in a way, our app does this for people too. With when you're tracking your workouts and tracking your food and all these sorts of things, there humans are pretty simple creatures, really. We're like, there's that child in all of us that wants to play and continue like playing a game. And so when you can apply that to a habit or something that you're wanting to build and make it more enjoyable, and actually, who's the guy that wrote Atomic Habits?
James Clear.
James Clear, yeah. James Clear talks about that a lot, about making your habits super easy to access and fun, because if you do that, you're more likely to go back and do it again. And I think Duo's like just perfectly encapsulated that because it's fun to just dive back into it. And so I think an important thing for people building habits is like not try to make it so chunky. To sit down for 2 hours on a Saturday and go deep into learning French that's a pretty big ask.
Yeah.
Because You're like, oh, do I really have the time and energy for this? But to break it down into a couple of little bits where you get some gold stars and some high fives or whatever that kind of jollies you along is a whole lot more of an enjoyable process. And I think we can apply that to all aspects of our life, right?
Just on that bit, I think that whole idea of being like, oh, I have to do this again, is like
Mm.
50% of the time. Like it's genuinely like one of those areas that I think we can apply to the workouts or the lunch meal or whatever quite regularly. Or at least I can. I don't know if anyone's going to resonate with this, but there's at least 40% of my workouts that I'm like, I'm just going to go. Like I don't feel like I'm jazzed up about it and jolly about getting a workout in today, but I'm going to get the workout in, and it's because
Mm.
I've booked it in on a Monday or whatever it might be. And I
Mm.
think just that nature of mastering your brain enough to do the thing when you said you would. You know, I use this example with parents all the time of like, you don't have to get motivated to go pick up your kids. You pick up your kids because they're waiting for you, right? And I think just being able to uh, stop looking at something like a workout as an optional part of your day is something that's just so easy to do, and looking at it as a luxury as something that I'll get around to it tomorrow. I've eliminated that, and I do think that if we look at this first, I'm going to break it down to three areas, right? Like trigger, routine, and then reward. The big part here is trigger, right? The heaviest weight in the front in the gym is the front door, and that ability to break down that little moment of like, oh, I just can't feel, I'm not up to it, and knowing that it's going to happen once a week or every day. It's like just eat the frog and start with the first episode and just, build on that. And I think just being able to reinforce that more often, right? I did it with workouts, I'm doing it with languages, and any habit that I want to reinforce moving forward, I'm not looking for this warm, fuzzy feeling to get into a habit. I'm just doing the thing when I said I would. And this is
Mm.
why we're a huge fan of the alarm or the time block or that nudge in some form. Now, what Duo does in this form is brilliant. I'll share three of them with you. One is the notifications that's done either in app or email. But the way they do it on the app, Mandy, is not just like a bing like everything else on your phone. They do that too. But you can actually select to have like a little screen window on your phone that's available. So it's not just like an app like everyone else, right? That takes up like that small, few pixels of your screen. It literally takes up what would usually be, if you can visualize this, four apps, right? So it's a bigger sort of screen within your screen. And throughout the day, you'll see the thing degrading, right? So it'll be nice and happy at the start of the day. It kind of feels like my little Tamagotchi. It's like, there's an emotional element to it, right? Where it's like Duo's sad, like don't let Duo down. Like this whole concept of like, your 140 a day streak was great, but like 140, 41 is going to be better. So there's all these like subtle little nudges emotionally to be like, come on, you said you want to do this thing. And I love how far they've gone with it. But in a day-to-day setting, obviously one, if you want to learn a language, do that. But if you want to do that as somewhere else in some other habit, those nudges in some form are very helpful. And I was talking to a client yesterday. He's like, God damn it, Ollie, you made me set up like these three alarms and to get a workout in or whatever the thing was. And he's like, I get annoyed at it every time, but I'm getting my workouts in. It's just like breaking that habit. And to your point, it's like it doesn't have to feel comfortable. It has
Mm.
to be like it has to jolt you out of the I'm doing everything for everyone else and I don't have time for me, framework.
Mm.
So there's that part. But the second part, which you said you just saw the other day, is people have now, or science has now shown that if you show a road sign that says you're going 101, slow down, just in writing, a certain percentage of people ignore it. Whereas if you go, you're doing 105, sad face, it makes more people slow down. So it shows that doesn't matter how sophisticated you feel you are, emotions apply to every human. And
Mm.
having that emotional touch to the app, we do the notifications, we do the nudges, obviously, in our app, but I'd love to bring in that emotion in a way of like, not that you're letting your coach down or you're letting someone down, but like I do think that has a role to play, and just understanding human behavior is kind of cool.
Nothing like a bit of emotional manipulation.
We'll probably have a little, if we take this too far, we'll end up with a little grumpy Ollie face being like, you're letting Ollie down on the app.
Yeah, it's a really, I guess you could absolutely go too far with this one, but it is a good point, right? That kind of living up to what humans, we want to be consistent with what we say we're going to do, right? So there
Yep.
is that aspect of us actually trying to live up to our own expectations of ourselves.
Yeah.
And, when you don't show up for yourself, you said you're going to do this thing and you don't do it, ultimately, maybe you let someone else down, but you're letting yourself down within that and you're going to be the sad face.
Totally.
Yeah.
The one thing, this is kind of tangent, but the idea of some of our best clients are like, oh, I've got Mandy in my ear, or I've got Ollie in my ear, and I think of them in that moment type thing. And that's the kind of cool stuff where, it is fundamentally emotion because you're thinking about someone else's feelings, I guess, in that environment. So it's a subtle balance between letting yourself down and letting others down around you. And I think that's in itself part of the power of having a coach in your corner is just that accountability nature of like, what would they think too? Um,
I
I
actually
don't
have
know
a
how I feel about
feeling.
that because I do
I
like
have a
that.
feeling there's a progression.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah,
I heard a psychologist talking about with where you the first part is that external accountability of someone else. Sometimes there does need to be that, and that's actually okay, where you have that voice pop up in your head, or well, my coach said, or I said to my coach I would, or whatever. The more you repeat that, the more that accountability becomes internalized and you do it for yourself anyway. So it's
yeah.
not we can kind of look at that external accountability as a negative of, oh, it needs to come from in you, but it doesn't always come from in you straight away. It's actually something that you possibly need to build within yourself. And it's okay to use those other tools like the sad face on the Speedo thing or the emotions on the Duolingo app or whatever to help build that accountability in yourself to actually be like, oh, I didn't do this thing today.
There's my little app podcast. You can just see that my little duo today is very happy. But usually around 4 o'clock, he'll start getting sad if I don't get round to my lesson. So I honestly, it's just one of those things that makes a big difference. And I think once it gets up to the last hour or so, right, like it's like 10 o'clock, you're about to run out of your streak or whatever. It's like one of the other characters will come up and be like, you're about to lose your streak. So I do find that, one takeaway for this will be the trigger. What are you doing to nudge yourself into reminding yourself of that thing you wanted to do? And just because the reminder comes up and you immediately go, well, I'm not in the mood, that's the whole point of you having the nudge. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. So I think it's a really nice way to just kind of eliminate emotion from the initial action. And then usually many times, like a good amount of times, I do the thing and I feel much better for doing that, right? So it's the same with workouts, same with having the meal, whatever it might be.
Mm.
If we dive into the routine piece, I think this is a super important part, right? Because there's a huge amount of components here that we can address around consistency. And we've had plenty of apps, I guess, around this, but I'd love to know your thoughts around for you, Mandy, like what's the things that I think we've talked about the trigger piece, like get into it, make it happen, ignore the emotion initially to make it happen more often kind of thing. But the actual routine aspect, what are the things that have come up for you around the duo thing or around just habit change in general that you like to reinforce?
Um, I think it's around the system set up and staying open to what that might look like.
Yep.
If you change nothing, everything's going to feel the same. So you're going to have to change something. And so it's kind of that we talk about time blocking or looking at your calendar or, look through what is your typical week, what's your ideal week, where can this actually fit? If it's not fitting here and there's a lot of friction, where could it be easier put? And basically just kind of working through whatever it is you're trying to build and building in a system where you can win on default, basically, where it happens as easy as possible. There's always going to be some psychological friction there if you might not want to do this thing. But if you've got it blocked in, this is what that time's for, you've got nothing else encroaching on that time, you've got no excuse to go and do the thing you said you were going to do. And just again putting some barriers in place of the things you want to stop and making the things you want to do a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I think we've bundled two of these together, right? Like the idea of the nudge initially to remind yourself, but that's quickly followed by the emotion that either makes it happen or not happen. So we're kind of reinforcing this whole idea of like make it happen regardless of the mood. But you
Mm.
mentioned this real early on that I'm just going to again reinforce is the idea of like repetition is better than intensity, right? Like if we really just get that thing in, regardless of both the emotion or even the recovery factor, this can go both ways with obviously in an exercise front, right? Like we have the clients that we need to apply an accelerator, right? A loving kick in the pants versus the people that we need to apply a brake pedal, which is like a slow down, right? Like you won't stop. And I think I'd still put 80% of people in the accelerator requirement in regards to like I don't feel like doing it, so I don't do it. It's like
Mm.
you're tired, so do it regardless, but change it slightly. If you're on 5 hours sleep, I don't think today's a good idea to go flat out with your leg workout. But you've
Yeah.
also had a 5 hour sleep for the last 10 days, so we kind of need to change something. So
Yeah.
there's usually in some cases like push the body, move the body. It's made to contract and strengthen and challenge yourself. Yet, if you're that person that's very much burning the candle at both ends, you've got massive projects on at work, and your body's already beat up, and now you love the workout, so you're getting in there regardless. You'll
Mm.
usually get better results by not pushing the body as hard and doing more of a stretch or mobility session. It's not that you remove the workout, but it's this I guess the whole idea with Duo that I really like is that you set those commitments up front. So I'll give you an example. You'll say, what would you like your initial commitment to be? Like, would you make it 50 days or 100 days or 150, etc.? And I'm willing to bet that people are okay to be like, I'm just going to start with 50 days versus 150 up front. Make it way easier to make it consistent long term, right? Because imagine this: if you say like, I'm going to be consistent the whole year, I'm not going to miss one day for the entire 365 days of the year, and you get to like day 10 and then fail for one, you're like, oh well, this goal was way too big. I haven't even made it to base camp now. I might as well quit now, right? Whereas if you set 50 days and you fail at day 30, you're like, oh, I got most of the way there. Like I can get back into it tomorrow. I'm good. There's the real nature behind having the goal set so far versus where you fail. And I think we've made these adjustments with our coaches and certain team members around, what would you like your target to be, right? And regardless of what it is, they say 15, right? I'm like, well, you got 2 last month, so 15 feels a little bit out of range. I would much rather that individual say, well, you're gonna select 3, so it pushes you just beyond 2, but just enough that even if you get 4, it's a bonus point. You feel great about it, right? So it's
Yeah.
this funny balance about being ambitious, but at the same time, I hate the word realistic, but it's the only one I can select at this point. To be
Yeah.
able to say, let's find that balance between the nudge of momentum versus the hopelessness felt by over ambition and not ever being able to grasp it.
Yeah, yeah. And this is totally about the design of it. It's like,
Mm.
I think of this when it comes to workouts or the consistency or anything like that, where if you look at the track record of the individual that you're talking to and be like, okay, on average, you've averaged maybe 1 workout a week and a couple of walks, and you're setting this goal of 4 workouts a week. I'm all for that if you want to drop the hammer and go for it. But if you're going to set the target that high and then fail on the first week and feel like a failure for that, then we didn't actually achieve the end, which was actually do the workouts to get healthy. So it's kind of like finding that, cool, what do you want? What's your dream? What would be achievable in a typical week?
Yeah.
We feel like you're winning, but you are a little bit challenged, and setting it there, and you can always stack more on. If you go for a couple of weeks and you're like, I'm hitting 3 easy now. But the other way that I think about that is actually in time frame of goal setting as well. When you set the target out too far, and like you say, if you stuff up in the first couple of weeks or whatever, you lose that momentum. The target is so far away, it's hard to get that momentum back again. Whereas if you make it shorter and say, like, next 2 weeks, I'm going hard on this, and then I'm going to stack some more on, and then I'm going to stack some more on, and I'm going to come back, recenter, refocus. Is this still where I want to go? Add some more and build in that way rather than in these like really long kind of distant chunks, which are so intangible and easy to stuff up because
Totally.
circles.
Yeah, and there's another part that's very much interlaced into there, which is that failure aspect, right? And I think this idea of naively saying, well, I'm going to go for 150 days, even though my track record is 2, right? I'm like, great that you've got high ambition, but we don't have a track record to back any of that, right? It's like someone coming out and saying, I'm going to build the next $1 billion company, but this is my first one, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be some initial proof required. And I think the idea that we look at here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Manny, but what I see here is you can't skip being bad at something before you be good. And this whole idea of like, well, I'm going to go for 150 days. I'm like, grasshopper, let's start with 3, like build towards that. And I had this discussion with a client the other day that was like, I'm going to go for 5 workouts. I'm like, mate, you've managed 1 a week. I think we work with 2, right? Let's nail that and crush that. And if you prove me wrong and you get 4 anyway, or 5, like you're an absolute weapon. But if we get 2 as a minimum, now we're looking at raising the baseline. And I think that's just an awesome way of addressing how much of this is a mental game. And I think just trying to set big targets doesn't impress anyone until you hit it. But by setting something so far out, your willpower or hope factor gets really beaten up when you stumble really early on, right? So set it small and build from there.
Yeah. It's this whole kind of thing that we focus on the goal, which is that end thing, and then keep focusing on that rather than actually identifying that and then putting all the time and effort into the system that allows us to get to that.
Yep.
Which is those micro steps along the way.
Totally. So we're going to move into your favorite topic now. And this is one that historically I've been really, really bad at. But it's you've locked in the nudge, you're getting it done. You're now being consistent with the habits, and we're creating that routine regardless of emotion. And then the third one is actually celebrating milestones, right? So actually what's called a pat on the back, Ollie, right? To make sure that things happen more often. In a book of yours last year, I think it was last year, that was obviously a huge one for you, The Gap or the Gain, which very much just highlighted this one point, which is fundamentally missing for many, many driven humans.
Mm.
Um, in some cases, potentially why they got there is there's a gap that we try fill by succeeding in things. But being able to celebrate at milestones fundamentally with human behavior, or what we know now, helps you feel a level of enjoyment. And humans will always do things they enjoy doing more often. Is there's some sort of reward loop, right? If you do something and you get a negative reaction, and then you do it again and you get the same negative reaction, your body's now reinforced, be like, don't do that thing again. You know what happens, right?
Mm.
So creating some sort of loop where you're like, I did a hard thing, but I felt so much better afterwards. You and I have been reinforced enough with workouts, no matter how sucky they were, that afterwards we feel stronger or more capable or whatever, that we'll
Yeah.
continue doing that workout, right? Because we
Yeah.
know what happens after. And 80, 90, 99% of that is very psychological. It's like, man, fuck, I feel pretty good after that. Like I feel better for doing that thing. Whereas if there's the opposite discussion, it becomes really challenging. So where was I going with that? I guess this idea of like measuring progress and also that discussion around progress, I think is worth looking at. So
Mm.
where would you go with that? That idea of celebrating for you?
Yeah, so the gap and the gain, we have talked about this before, but just for those who don't understand it, the gap is when you're focused on the thing you want to achieve and how far you have to go to get to it, where the gain is where you focus on how far you've come from your starting point. And when you focus on the gap, you never feel enough. You potentially always feel a failure. That gap of where you're going always moves. It's like the horizon, it's always moving ahead. And there's example after example of this throughout history of people who have chased some goal, whether it's fame or fortune or whatever, and they're never happy with it because you never get to that point and it ever is enough. But what is enough is learning to focus on that gain piece of who am I becoming on the way towards this goal. So you need to have the goal, that kind of North Star of the direction you're going. But the real growth is in what did I learn along the way and how am I different to what I was yesterday or what I was a year ago or what I was 10 years ago because of the little micro steps that I've put in. And the cool part about that is the tiniest thing doesn't make a difference in a long journey, but the tiniest thing makes a difference to how far you've come. So if you work out today and you haven't, and it's your first workout of the week, it matters because it's one step forward from where you started. In the grand scheme of things, it might not measure up as that much, but it really truly does in that gain piece. So kind of being able to identify the gap or where you're going, but then bring all of your focus back to what is this making of me and who am I becoming by going this. This is where we get to celebrate these small little micro steps of I showed up and did my workout today, even though I didn't want to do it. Yeah, go me. And those sorts of things, I think you get to feel a success for doing the thing that you could have also felt a failure for because you only did it once. You can have it both ways. It's the same action, two completely different mindsets.
Totally. This is a really interesting concept and a whole podcast in itself, but the ability to look at you already achieved things that you said would make you happy is a quote that just slapped me in the face, being like, God damn it, you're right. It's once you've achieved that thing, or it's a couple months with your new shiny toy, you're like, oh, well, what's the next one, right? And it's just such a natural balance that I thought about this a really long time, which is if you want to grow, put yourself in a room with people that are way ahead of you and you'll feel incredibly uncomfortable. Put yourself in a room with people that are way behind you and you'll feel very successful for a short period of time. So it's this very interesting understanding of like, I nearly thought the other day, I'm like, golly, I'm choosing, and some of the most successful people in the world are choosing to chew on projects that are bigger than they can achieve in their lifetime, right? So they will have a massive gap between where they are now and what they'd like to achieve. So I started to think for a little while, and I'm going to say I was wrong, where it'd be like, okay, well, in some cases, it might actually be better to put yourself in a community that isn't so achievement focused, and I would be happier because I'm not creating such a massive gap. But the interesting balance here, or at least what I've found, and I'd love to know your thoughts, is when you're using that quote, I think really summed it back to me, which is you've already achieved things that you said would make you happy, is realizing that staying still and not wanting anything is not the pinnacle. The pursuit of the next thing is. So it becomes the whole, like, enjoy the character you're becoming rather than the character the goal that you achieve becomes a really nice way to realize that whole pursuit and development and enjoyment of the process of just doing hard things is 100% the goal.
Mm.
So getting a bit esoteric here, but looking at something like celebration, you have these micro commitments along the way that if you have this massive project that you're trying to achieve over 20 years, but you've got these micro wins along the way to be like, I got my first funding round, or I got my first bench press, or I got my first whatever, it does allow you to look at the things along the way and be like, that's a really good achievement. I'm nowhere where I wanted to be, but I'm ticking along things what I'd like, and I'm really glad to be here, right? Is a subtle balance for me personally that I feel good with, because I don't know about you, that whole idea of like create a massive gap and achieve big things, but I always feel like I'm not enough, or this idea of, well, I might as well just hang around with people that are chilling and I'll be good. But like that, humans want to progress in some form. And I think it's a fundamental, like innate feeling of progress needs to be there as well.
I think it's one of like human needs, right? Is to have a purpose.
Yeah.
And there needs to be something which is growing you or stretching you, or where you're part of something bigger than just your own, oh yeah, I'm happy today, I'm just going to sit on the porch in my rocking chair and not care about anything.
Yeah.
But at the same time being able to break that down into little steps along the way where you can be happy. It's this tension of two opposites, right? Contentment in the moment, but also progression towards something, which is super interesting to work with. And I think about this in the context of, like, for me, working towards some certain strength goals, which, were out of my reach. You can set the goal, but then you break down into, well, this is, where I'm at, and this is what I got to. Like, I'm not there yet, but I'll progress to this next layer. And if you kind of build yourself a little bit of a roadmap towards something, it gives you these checkpoints along the way to track progress by, and that's quite motivating as well, I think. And it allows you to be happy in the moment of, this is awesome, I'm progressing towards this thing, and there's that contentment piece, but there's also this bigger purpose that you're building towards as well.
Totally. And as I was saying that, I kind of thought about this idea of, oh, maybe that's just where I am at life. What does that look like when I'm, mid 50s, 60s, 70s, right? Do I take my foot off the gas? But this is where I think I'd like to really push back on that is, it's not, sorry?
I can't see that happening.
Yeah. Is this idea of like, this isn't just psychological, it's very much physical too, right? Where I've seen plenty of people who decided to retire at 55 or 60 or whatever it might have been, and then their physical health drastically plummeted because they no longer had something they were chewing on, right? Whereas I've got a bloke who's still working for my dad, and he's 85, and he looks very capable. I guess he's slowing down, but like he's still got something he gets up for every single day. So it doesn't have to be the work pursuit, but there's something there that has a project or purpose or a desire to kind of improve or continue to do stuff, right? This whole idea of magically retiring and everything being sort of finished, in a lot of ways it feels miserable because I've got nothing to focus on, right? So I think, there's intensities to that can change, and there's very much people that I know are very happy without a huge project in mind, but there's also, I think, seasons of push and pull, and I think being able to feel comfortable with that space. The people that I see that are the most unhappy are the ones being like, oh, I can't wait for retirement, right? And it's become such a phrase in today's world of, oh, I've only got 10 more years to go, or 5 more years. I'm like, bloody enjoy it now. Like there's so many things within the week that you can really enjoy and make those adjustments. So bit off track, but I think just that ability to lean back on the idea of continual purpose or drive forward.
Yeah.
The last one I want to bring up, and this was a really interesting one. So let's bring it back to Duo for a second. This is what we were talking about, is improving learning, right? Doing something like French. You can do all the lessons in the world, but it's still not better as getting plonked to the middle of French and actually using the languages, right? It's the same as reading the book on how to drive. You're still not going to learn how to drive until you get into a car and drive the thing, right? And I think this is where you get, we've talked about this on tons of podcasts around this idea of theory versus practical and being able to get closer to get yourself in a room with other people like that. Now, this obviously applies in so many different areas. There's two that I want to bring up, and more than welcome to bring a third, a fifth, 10th in. The first one being connect with others ahead of you. This is something we see so much in a gym scene, but in our world, we call mastery, being sort of our long-term clients being with us six months plus, where they've done some of the foundations, they know what they need to do, but how are we going to make this happen long-term and create these sort of engaging milestones to keep moving forward? Now, something that we've found is people are like, oh, I'm not ready for mastery. I don't feel like I'm at their level. And it's like, that's a personal internal judgment that's 100% blocking you from moving forward. And the reason I bring this up is no one ahead of you will look down on you for trying, right? If I see someone that's like they're clearly their first day in the gym, I go, awesome, glad you're here, right? Or, a bloke I was working with the other day who's, he's got 30 kilos odd to lose and just stepping out of a chair is the biggest move. I'm like, you did that twice this week. You only did it once last week. Like, keep going. And it's just, I love seeing that and people just developing. It's a huge focus of mine is just people who like getting better and my kind of people, right? And I think that's something that in a society where potentially a large portion of people aren't growing or moving forward, it's very normalized to be like, oh, well, look at that dick. He's trying to do this big thing over there. And there's this tall poppy syndrome, certainly in New Zealand, Australia, where there's a there's a feeling that people will judge you for trying to do a thing, but the only people judging you are the ones behind you, which unfortunately is the majority, but they're the people that are not willing to make any changes at all, right? It's a classic couch critic.
Yeah.
So I think being able to look at that and give yourself grace to be like, anyone that's actually someone you admire or look up to is 100% rooting for you because they're in a spot where they want to see you get better because it's just that growth or self-improvement.
Yeah, yeah. And this came out of, we actually talked about this on podcast last week, as one of the takeaways from our Auckland event recently
Yeah.
was that feeling of when you're in a room with a whole bunch of people, all at different stages, all at different kind of, with different goals on this journey. There was no judgment about that for anyone, people just starting, people with some struggles or whatever. There's no judgment there because everyone's in the same place working towards something.
Yeah.
And you only feel that when you get amongst those people, right? You don't, when you're amongst people who are kind of maybe even challenged by the fact that you're choosing to change something, then you're going to feel that kind of irritate, that what's the word I'm looking for there, that negativity coming through of, oh, why are you bothering sort of thing, or you don't know what you're doing. When you're in a room of people that actually are all focused and moving forward, all you get is this kind of, come on, you've got this, you can do it, well done you for showing up. It's a totally different feeling, eh?
100%. Yeah, yeah. The last thing I wrote down here was it's much easier to get in shape by hanging out with body recent than it is your old drinking buddies. And you can use, a sport, any sporting group you like, but that ability to associate yourself or have that immersion factor to what you're doing is really helpful. So the idea to look at that is, one, who you're connecting with, who you're surrounding yourself with is probably a bigger question there, which is if you're surrounding yourself with those people that constantly want to pull you back in the bucket, right? So this whole idea of, I think it's crabs. I think where if you put a whole bunch of crabs in a bucket, everyone kind of scrambles around until one bucket finally catches the side. And as soon as it actually tries to get out, all the other crabs pull it back into the bucket because like, well, it's, you finally found a way, or whatever crabs are thinking in that moment. And it's very much what's happening in society where it's, as soon as somebody gets out of the hole, which is I'm complaining about my current situation, but I'm not changing it, to someone who's like, I want to change my situation and this is what I'm doing, that's where the judgment is. And I think it's 100% uncomfortable. We're not ignoring it. We've seen it plenty of times in very interesting spaces. The one that really gets to me, Mandy, is, oh, my partner doesn't want me to do this program because they're worried that if I get really sexy, I get really lean, I get really whatever, they're not going to want to be with me. I'm like, that's messed up. But I can tell you right now, we hear it all of the time. We work with so many people, we talk to so many people, like thousands every single month, that you'd be surprised what we hear. But that's one of the ones that I fundamentally don't understand, which is that just the crab getting pulled back into the bucket, right? So who you surround yourself with, that immersion of get yourself in communities. And again, that doesn't mean that you need to separate from a partner if they're in that spot, but you do need to get yourself in a space initially around a group that's much easier, right? Your cycling crew, your bowls crew, whatever the thing is where you're doing something that gets you around people that you enjoy being around, that raises the bar of who you are. And I think that immersion factor, for many of our clients is like, even if I just check in for like 10 minutes on one of our group calls, I feel so much better and I'm ready to rock for that month. And I think that's a pretty powerful part of why we continue, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, right? Why we continue to add the group alongside the one-on-one is without that immersion factor, your capacity to just handle and tolerate challenges in life is lower. So just a nice one to add in there, or at least my final note.
Yeah, yeah, it's so important. And I think as you can have that group aspect of, say, which we do in the program, and that's so important. And then even just looking for one or two people in your life who you can talk to about it, who's going to get excited about it with you, even if they don't do the thing, right? Even if you can just tell them, I did that thing today or whatever, and they can be like, awesome, go you.
Yep.
Hunting those people out.
Totally. So what we're going to do is a little action step for this call, team. It will be, or podcast episode, whatever, is share this with one person that you know is trying to improve their health, or you knows that they're watching you silently. They're like, oh, this person's up to something. I'm really interested to see where they go. This kind of understanding of habit change and what Duolingo is obviously doing very well, and the parts that we're emulating to really get success for our members as well. Share it with one person or many people that you think are on that same journey or want to improve, because I'm obsessed by this psychology of habit change, and I think just understanding one or two of these, the nudge, the rewards, the consistency, the celebration aspects, you just remind yourself of one of those things to make it a little bit easier, a little bit more enjoyable, that you're not as good as you want to be, but you are getting better, and you should celebrate it because it's the pursuit that's always more enjoyable than getting there. Is a nice reminder and probably a good discussion to have with someone else as well. So we'll leave it there, Mandy. Appreciate you to always go through the sort of tangents and try to wrap it back around, but that idea of um, how to learn new stuff and feel good in the process of realizing you can get better without beating yourself up is a huge part of health and kind of getting better in any area.
And knowing that if you're building these habits, you're the same as us. Like, we're still building habits, right? But
Yep.
it never ends. If you're interested in personal growth and improving your health and whatnot, you're always going to be coming back to some little habit that you're building, and it's part of the journey and it's part of the fun of it.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. If Mandy and I are all itchy and a bit antsy, we're either drowning in stuff we need to do, or we need to find the new thing to learn or develop, right? And it's ironically a full flip of the switch of like, I feel too uncomfortable. I feel too comfortable. It feels uncomfortable is a very interesting place. But hey, I don't know if that's a screw loose or something to strive for. We're
There
yet to
might be
find
another
out.
podcast.
We'll let you know. All right, guys. We'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed it.